your attendance points or your extra credit points that you guys are trying to get here. So welcome to Faculty Read Series. I'm Lisa Young, Access Services Director here at the library. And in this informal yet thoughtful series, we invite faculty to choose a few books that have influenced their career path or their life story or simply inspired them in some way. And we just ask them to tell us a little bit about the books and kind of their career path or their life, whatever they would like to share there. So they have the creative freedom to interpret it as they see fit. So with each installment of the series, I personally have learned something new about each professor or their passion or their research. My hope is that you will too. So with that being said, we are featuring two awesome professors today. I know you all would agree with me. Dr. Susan Gustafson and Dr. Paul Wright. So as for introductions, it's a bit of a Faculty Read Series tradition to read reviews from a very credible source, RateMyProfessor.com. I know that some of you guys will probably take credit for these. We'll go ahead with Professor Wright. Coach Paul is one of the coolest people I know. He truly cares about all his students and their goals. He wants to do anything to help them achieve their goals. He even connected a student with an expert in the field so that that student could gain connections in his future industry. Amazing teacher. And now for Susan. This professor is awesome! Exclamation point. She brings in speakers, makes lectures interesting, and gives great feedback. Would definitely recommend taking a class for her. So without further ado, I give you these two highly recommended professors.
All those accolades. My head just got this much bigger, so if I tilt one way, that's why. So you want me to start? Okay.
Yes.
So just to talk about a couple of the books that I chose, it was very difficult. I was inspired to read by both of my parents. Probably many of you were read to as a child, and Paul probably remembers this, that back in our day, you didn't have Kindles. Of course, that is what I use today. That was a bit of a transition to go from a hard book to electronic version. But we used to go to what was called the bookworm, and we could trade in books, and you could take books and get credit for them, so it was a few pennies, but then you were able to get another book to take home, and that was a really big deal to us. So that was one of my introductions. Of course, the traditional library was the other route that my parents did with us too. So great memories. Reading was a big part of my upbringing, so very thankful for that, to have been inspired to read. So two of the books that I chose, one is The Day That the Earth Stood Still. It's actually a novella. My mother actually gave this book to me to read, and it's really somewhat of a science fiction type of story, but it has to do with an alien that landed on the planet and how our race, as a human race, responded to this alien, this invader, and we didn't do very well with it. Of course, they're a foreigner, we don't like them, there must be something wrong with them, they're not like us. But there were other characters in there that wanted to learn more about this race. What can we learn from them? What can they teach us? So this was one of my favorite stories that I read routinely in my bedroom, and I had my little corner I sat in. You guys may have had something similar, and I would kind of hide behind my bedroom door with my pillow and my blanket and sit there and get lost in the story. So that's one of my stories that I remember. Of course, I have numerous other ones that I could have also used as well from my childhood. And then a more recent one is, some of you may have even seen the series to this one, The Alienist by Andrew Carr, is another one of my favorite more recent stories that I'm not even sure how I came about the book to learn about it, but this has to do with the early days of the psychologist and the psychiatrist, and they were called alienists because the people that they worked with were alienated from the rest of society. It's still something we do today, sadly, and this is dated back to the maybe late 1800s, early 1900s. And so how these individuals, this particular physician, and boy, I'm going to blank on his name because it's very German, who he analyzed individuals, but he saw them from a very different perspective. He saw them as a whole person and wanted to do what he could to help them. And of course, he worked with the local police in investigating very serious crimes and murders that were committed. So this goes to the forensic side of understanding what made that individual commit such a horrific crime, and him helping to catch the murderer was based on what he knew, how he could analyze the individual based on what that individual did to commit the crime, how they committed it. Was it a crime of passion? Was it based on in the alienness, because there's also a follow-up story to that one. It had to do with this child's upbringing and then what led this individual to later commit more horrific crimes. So anyway, that's a little bit of a background on that. Still love to read, even though I'm actually not officially a PhD yet. I'm working on that. I'm completing my doctorate, so when I'm done doing that work, reading, I get out my Kindle and I'm reading Dan Brown right now, Angels and Demons, even though I've read it before, but there's always those classics I like to go back to lose myself in, and I feel like it helps keep me grounded and, helps me even to better understand the world. And I will tell you, for those of you that maybe aren't the best writers, reading helps you write better. Don't you agree? I think reading helps you write better. So there's a little bit more about myself, and I don't know if you want to take over, if you want me to read from one of the books.
Ooh, I'd love to hear you read from one of the books.
Any
that's okay
preference
with
to,
else.
has anyone ever heard of The Day the Earth Stood Still? This was a really big, did you read it for a class thing, or was it something just, anybody have to read it for a class? Because usually that's kind of one of those things. So is that a preference for the, it's actually a very short read. It's pretty, let's see if I can find it in my Kindle. Oh, there we go. Look at that. Take a few seconds for it to... I don't usually read on my little phone. I know you guys can do that easily, but as you get older, your glasses get thicker, and they get way more expensive. So, actually, it took me to a part where I had just finished reading it. Golly, let's see if I can find a good part in here to read. We'll just start with chapter 1, start at the beginning, right? From his perch high on the ladder above the museum floor, Cliff Sutherland studied carefully each line and shadow of the great robot, then turned and looked thoughtfully down at the rush of visitors come from all over the solar system to see Newt, I think is how it is pronounced. It's spelled G-N-U-T, but I think it's pronounced Newt, and the traveler for themselves, and to hear once again their amazing tragic story. He himself had come to feel an almost proprietary interest in the exhibit, and with some reason. He had been the only freelance picture reporter on the Capitol grounds when the visitors from the unknown had arrived, and had obtained the first professional shots of the ship. And remind you, this is back when there were cameras, okay, for those of you that know what an actual camera is. He had witnessed at close hand every event of the next mad few days. He had thereafter photographed many times the 8-foot robot, the ship, and the beautiful slain ambassador, Cletu, and his imposing tomb out in the center of the tidal basin, and such was the continuing news value of the event to the billions of persons throughout habitable space. He was there now once more to get still another shot, and if possible, a new angle. This time he was after a picture which showed Newt as weird and menacing. The shots he had taken the day before had not given quite the effect he wanted, and he hoped to get it today. But the light was not yet right, and he had to wait for the afternoon to wane a little. The last of the crowd admitted in the present group hurried in, exclaiming at the great pure green curves of the mysterious time-space traveler, then completely forgetting the ship at sight of the awesome figure and great head of the giant Newt. Hinged robots of crude man-like appearance were familiar enough, but never had earthling eyes lain on one like this. For Newt had almost exactly the shape of a man, a giant, but a man with greenish metal for man's covering flesh, and greenish metal for man's bulging muscles. Except for the loincloth, he was nude. He stood like the powerful god of the machine of some undreamed of scientific civilization on his face a look of sullen, brooding thought. Those who looked at him did not make jests or idle remarks, and those nearest him usually did not speak at all. His strange, internally illuminated red eyes were so set that every observer felt they were fixed on himself alone, and he engendered a feeling that he might at any moment step forward in anger and perform unimaginable deeds. A slight rustling sound came from speakers hidden in the ceiling above, and at once the noises of the crowd lessened. The recorded lecture was about to be given. Cliff sighed. He knew the thing by heart, had even been present when the recording was made, and met the speaker, a young chap named Stillwell. Do you want me to keep reading, or is that good enough, I think?
I think that's pretty good.
Okay.
I wanna
Are you intrigued? Do you want to learn more?
Well, I'd like to know, Susan, what would you say is the main point of the day the earth stood still?
For me, it is not being afraid of the unknown, because this particular reporter had no fear. He so wanted to learn from this alien that he was willing to risk his own life, because he also had to risk, we had the government, of course, because this is actually in D.C. where this alien is. So, of course, the government has to come in and control everything. So he actually sneaks in to be able to go in to try to find out more, because he believes through his photography, he can see that the robot has actually moved, where everybody else thinks that it has remained perfectly still. So he knows there's something else going on. So his willingness to learn more, to not be afraid to learn more, that there's something that we can learn from this alien from another planet that would help us, is how he sees it, that I can learn from this person or this alien. So
Yes, absolutely. Another question for you, Susan, is that, with your two books that you chose, it seems like you like to dive deep in humanity and psychology. And can you share a little bit how your reading interests may have inspired your career path?
Oh yeah, I'm fascinated by people. I love to learn about people. I love all different cultures, and that's, I think, something even being raised in the Midwest, but still had exposure to lots of different cultures, whether it was Asian, German, Italian, Irish, and so I like learning what makes people tick, and so definitely I like to delve in deep to the psyche of people, and I think it helps me to understand people in reality more as well, because these are typically based on some form of reality that I think we learn more about. So yes, that would be one.
Absolutely. And my final question, and I'll open it up to others, but can you share with us a little bit about your career path, about how you ended up where you are today?
Boy, that was a little bit of a challenge. Like many of our students, when they come in, they wanted to become physical therapists. I was the same. Unfortunately, physics was not for me. So that took me out of the running for that, so I had to find a different career path. I've always liked science, so I think that's also partly why I tend to choose books that either are science fiction, or I just finished reading Andrew Mayne, who is actually also a magician, but an amazing writer, and he's written books about space, being in outer space. So I'm fascinated by that someday we are going to possibly be living on these space stations. So science has always been a big draw for me. So it was a matter of finding, so dietetics was an area that I wanted to go into, because I like to help people and to understand, why do people eat the foods that they do? Why do people have weight problems? Why do people have health problems? So I would say that's partly why. So yeah, I love the science, love learning, even though I love knowing that there's still things we don't know. And I'm fascinated by that we're still interested in learning. Some people think, oh, we know everything. No, we don't. There's still a lot to be learned.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to open it up to the floor. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I bought a little stack of books. So I was talking to my children about that I was going to be doing this. And the two books that Lisa has on her list is The Energy Bus by John Gordon and The Element by Ken Robinson. So I'm going to talk about those in a second. But I asked my children, what do you think of my favorite books? Well, they started off with The Gas We Pass, the story of farts. So I was going to read that to you, but I decided that was way too advanced. So my favorite book to read to kids, which is surprising, is they love me telling The Giving Tree. Have some of you seen this before? So I'm actually, in a weird way, going to talk about these books by reading your children's book first. Is that all right with everybody?
Yes.
Can we read a little book from Michelle Silverstein? All right. So The Giving Tree. All right. Once there was a tree, and she loved a little boy, and every day the boy would come, and he would gather her leaves. I'm going to read very fast because we've got lots to talk about. And make them into crowns and play king of the forest. He would climb up her trunk and swing from her branches and eat apples. And they would play hide and go seek. And when he was tired, he would sleep in her shade. And the boy loved the tree very much. And the tree was happy. But time went by, and the boy grew older, and the tree was often alone. Then one day the boy came to the tree, and the tree said, "Come, boy, come and climb up my trunk and swing from my branches and eat apples and play in my shade and be happy." "I'm too big to climb and play," said the boy. "I want to buy things and have fun. I want some money. Can you give me some money?" "I'm sorry," said the tree, "but I have no money. I have only leaves and apples. Take my apples, boy, and sell them in the city. Then you'll have money, and you will be happy." And so the boy climbed up a tree and gathered her apples and carried them away, and the tree was happy. But the boy stayed away for a long time, and the tree was sad, and then one day the boy came back, and the tree shook with joy. And she said, "Come, boy, climb up my trunk and swing from my branches and be happy." "I'm too busy to climb trees," said the boy. "I want a house to keep me warm," he said. "I want a wife, and I want children, and so I need a house. Can you give me a house?" "I have no house," said the tree. "The forest is my house. But you may cut off my branches and build a house. Then you will be happy." And so the boy cut off her branches and carried them away to build his house. And the tree was happy. But the boy stayed away for a long time. When he came back, the tree was so happy she could hardly speak. "Come, boy," she whispered, "come and play." "I'm too old and sad to play," said the boy. "I want a boat that will take me far away from here. Can you give me a boat?" "Cut down my trunk and make a boat," said the tree. "Then you can sail away and be happy." And so the boy cut down her trunk and made a boat and sailed away. And the tree was happy, but not really. And after a long time, the boy came back again. "I am sorry, boy," said the tree, "but I have nothing left to give you. My apples are gone. My teeth are too weak for apples," said the boy. "My branches are gone," said the tree. "You cannot swing on them." "I am too old to swing on branches," said the boy. "My trunk is gone," said the tree. "You cannot climb." "I am too tired to climb," said the boy. "I am sorry," sighed the tree. "I wish that I could give you something, but I have nothing left. I am just an old stump. I am sorry." "I don't need very much now," said the boy. "Just a quiet place to sit and rest. I am very tired." "Well," said the tree, straightening herself up as much as she could. "Well, an old stump is good for sitting and resting. Come, boy, sit down and rest." And the boy did. And the tree was happy. So I find that a very depressing book, but my children love it. But it actually leads into the books that I've chosen for today. And so I'll go ahead and start with The Energy Bus. So, and I know I've got some of my UNIV students in the classroom right here, so because we're reading this as a class. And so the premise of this book is that George is a man, he's working, his life is falling apart, his marriage is on the rocks, he doesn't have a very good relationship with his children, he's about to lose his job at an electrical company, and he's just having a really rough time. Then one day he goes out to get in his car to go to work and gets a flat tire. And so now he really feels that the world is against him. So he ends up having to take the bus to work. So for 10 days, he has to ride the bus to work. And he gets on the bus the first day, and it's raining, and he's just miserable. And he meets Joy. And Joy is the bus driver, ladies and gentlemen. And I love the name of the bus driver, it being Joy. And so Joy basically teaches him some life lessons. And so I'm going to just read you just a couple of those life lessons. So, and it actually starts with, let me start with this. Everything happens for a reason. So this is Joy talking to George, because George is very upset. Everything happens for a reason. Don't forget that. Every person we meet, every event in our life, every flat tire happens for a reason. You can choose to ignore it or ask what that reason is and try to learn from it. Every problem has a gift for you in its hands. As my man Richard Bach says, you can choose to see the curse or the gift. And this one choice will determine if your life is a success story or a one big soap opera. All right, so she's kind of giving him a little bit of a reality check here. And she goes on to introduce him to rule number 1. So this is, you take nothing away from this little session, take this away. Marie, what is rule number 1?
I forgot what it was.
You are the driver of your own bus. Okay, so there you go. I know it's on the tip of your tongue. So, but you are the driver of your own bus, and that's what she starts with, because sometimes life can go ahead and deliver lemons, right? And then it's up to us to choose whether we're just going to be sour or whether we're going to try and make lemonade out of it. And so I love that the message throughout this book talks about that you really do have control over your life, and you can make choices that either are for the good or maybe not for the good, right? And so I love rule number 1, that you are the driver of your own bus. The second rule, I'm not going to destroy the whole book for you, the second rule is about having a vision for yourself, right? So I know that, because I know a lot of my students are in the room, so I know that all of you have an idea of what you want to do with your life. It's why you've come to Lindenwood, and it's why perhaps that you have chosen the major that you're in, and why you're pursuing the career path that you're on, right? So that is your personal vision. But how concrete is that vision? So remember, you're the driver of your own bus. And then her rule number 2, Miss Joy in here, says that you need to have a vision for yourself, because that vision then helps you make really good choices about where you're going to go with your life, right? And George, he didn't have a lot of vision, so everything in his life was falling apart, largely because he was thinking about the wrong things, right? And you've probably heard about the law of attraction. I could have brought The Secret. I love reading The Secret. Anybody know about The Secret, the book The Secret? So it's all about the law of attraction, that we can literally attract to our life positive things, or if we're very negative and pessimistic, we can often attract some very negative things to our life. So in fact, if you look at your life right now, I guarantee your life is exactly what you're attracting to it. So if you are feeling miserable and upset and down in the dumps and feel like everything's not going your way, well, guess what? You are to blame, because you are attracting it to you. Likewise, if you feel your life is on a good path and you feel really happy about getting up every morning and going to class and you're doing exactly what you feel you were set here to do, then guess what? You are the driver of your own bus, you've got a vision, and you are attracting to you a whole bunch of positive things. So I'm a big sports psychologist. Some of you guys know this. So I work a lot with elite athletes, and so I truly live with those athletes the law of attraction. So those athletes that go on to represent their countries at the Olympic Games, those athletes that are very, very successful, well, they don't do it in a vacuum. I mean, they do it because they have this very strong vision and a very strong purpose, and they are willing to make a lot of different sacrifices in order to achieve success. So that's kind of what she talks about in this book. And as we go through, she talks about the importance. Rule number 3 is all about positive energy. So energy is contagious. And I know you guys know this, right? Because some of you have been in my classes before. So I love this little story, if I'll tell it to you. A man goes to the village to visit the wise man. He says to the wise man, I feel like there are 2 dogs inside me. One dog is this positive, loving, kind, and gentle dog. And then I have this angry, mean-spirited, and negative dog. And they fight all the time. I don't know which is going to win. The wise man thinks for a moment. He says, I know which is going to win. The one you feed the most is going to win. So why not feed the positive dog, right? We all have it. Every single one of you in here has had days where everything just looks like it's all falling apart, right? And guess what? On those days, you're feeding the negative dog. And, you stub your toe in the morning, you go out, the car runs out of gas, you're late to class, and you find out you've got a quiz you knew nothing about, and then you get the call and you break up with your boyfriend or girlfriend, and then you go to the store and the store's closed, and just everything just feels like the world's against you. And guess what? Even in that first moment when you stubbed the toe when you got out of bed, you started feeding the negative dog. And throughout the rest of the day, you kept feeding it. So you started embracing almost this negativity that was coming at you. So this book, The Energy Bus, talks about how we have this ability to attract positive energy in our lives. But we have to then change our mindset. We have to really embrace that positivity and keep attracting and have a positive attitude. Hi!
Hi.
Come join us. It's good to see you. So all the way through the book, it's in this first book, it's introduced to George and his life, and I don't want to completely spoil it for you, but George looks like he's going to lose his job at the start of the book. In fact, everybody on his team is waiting for him to get fired. And he knows he's going to get fired. One of the reasons he's going to get fired is because he's just so negative and nobody on his team wants to work with him. So in here it talks also about energy vampires, right? So that's rule number 7, I think, that we need to stay away from energy vampires. Again, there are people in our life that take energy away from us. They're really negative people. And if you think about who is in your life right now, probably some of you can identify a couple of energy vampires. They literally leech that joy out of you, right? And so guess what? George identified after having these little lessons with Joy, the bus driver, he identified that he was actually an energy vampire. He was actually taking energy out of the very people he was working with. And so he made a conscious effort to flip the switch, that he was going to go to the work and be the complete opposite of an energy vampire. Not only that, those people who did not want to work on his team, he was going to remove them. And so at the end of the book, he suddenly turns everything around. They get this huge, massive contract, saves his job, but also saves the job of 5 or 6 people that are working on his team. All because he just changed. He made this change of his attitude. And so those, again, who are my students, you know this. I'm really big into positive attitude because I really believe we can literally change our stars the more positive that we are in the world around us. So that's my energy bus, which takes me to The Element. So this is a book by Dr. Ken Robinson, who's a sports psychologist and sort of a life coach. And I'm a storyteller. And again, if you've had class with me, you know this. So I tell a lot of stories. And the reason I'm drawn to this book is because there's a whole bunch of stories. So anybody know what the element is? Like, what is your element? Carly, what is your element? What do you do with your life at Lindenwood? She plays lacrosse, and she's been to nationals every single year. She's a senior. She's captain of the girls' women's lacrosse team. She's been to a Final Four twice. That's her element. She loves lacrosse. So your element is something that you're passionate about, that literally lifts you out of bed and gets you excited to take on the world. Katie, what is your element? Advocacy. Katie is an amazing young woman. So she is an advocate for individuals with disabilities. She also is a member of the U.S. sled hockey team, and she plays for the Lady Blues, and she is a phenomenal young woman. She went to Troy High School, went to state, was the first ever, right? Were you first ever? I think you were, right? You were the first ever high school athlete to compete in track and field at a state championship, largely due to advocacy, because she is speedy. You should see her. I still remember when she was only like a sophomore or junior, and she was destroying people around that track. But that's her element. She loves sports, and she loves being an advocate for individuals with disabilities. So, Mr. Nash, what's your element?
Football.
Nash is a phenomenal football player. So he's a senior, and he's given his life. I mean, how many years have you played football, Nash?
Since 3rd grade.
Since 3rd grade, so we're talking almost 20 years of his life. He is committed to being the very, very best football player he can possibly be. So now I just picked up a lot of sports and athletes. Well, this book is not all about sports and just athletes. It's just about potential. There is, in fact, let's see if I can find it. There's a great story in here. Can I tell a story? Am I doing okay with time?
Oh, you're great.
So it's a little bit long, but you'll get the idea. It's set in the 1930s. One of my heroes, believe it or not, is this guy right here. And it's really cool that he shows up in the book. So when 12-year-old John Wilson walked into his chemistry class at Scarborough High School for Boys, just down the road from where I grew up in England, it was a rainy day in late October. He had no way of knowing that his life was about to change completely. The class experiment that day was to show how heating a container of water would bring oxygen bubbling to the surface, something students at this school and at all schools around the world have been doing for a very long time. The container the teacher gave John to heat, however, was not like the containers students everywhere had used. Somehow this container mistakenly held something more volatile than water. It turned out that the container had the wrong solution because the laboratory assistant had been distracted and put the wrong label on the bottle. And when John heated it with his Bunsen burner, the container exploded, shattering glass bottles in the vicinity, destroying a portion of the classroom and pelting the students with razor-edge shards. Several students came away from this accident bleeding. John Wilson came away from it blinded in both eyes. Wilson spent the next 2 months in the hospital. When he returned home, his parents attempted to find a way to deal with the catastrophe that had befallen their lives, but Wilson did not regard the accident as a catastrophe. It did not strike me even then as a tragedy, he said once in an interview with the Times. He knew he had the rest of his life to live, and he did not intend to live it in an understated way. He learned Braille really quickly and continued his education at the esteemed Worcester College for the Blind. There, he not only excelled as a student, but became an accomplished rower, swimmer, actor, musician, and orator. From Worcester, Wilson studied law at Oxford University. Away from the protected environments of a school set up for blind students, he needed to contend with a busy campus and the very active streets in the vicinity. Rather than relying on a walking stick, though, he relied on an acute sense of hearing and what he called his obstacle sense to keep him out of harm's way. At Oxford, he received his law degree and set out to work for the National Institute for the Blind. His real calling, however, was still waiting for him. Well, in 1946, so this is dated a little bit, but in 1946, Wilson went on a fact-finding tour of British territories in Africa and the Middle East. What he found there was rampant blindness. And unlike the accident that cost him his eyesight, the disease that affected so many of these people were preventable with proper medical attention. For Wilson, it was one thing to accept his own fate and quite another to allow something to continue when it could be fixed so easily. This moved into action. The report Wilson delivered upon his return led to the formation of the British Empire Society for the Blind, which is now called Sight Savers International, which some of you might know. Wilson himself serves as director of the organization for more than 30 years. His work often led him to travel more than 50,000 miles a year, but he considered this an essential part of the job, believing that he needed to be present in the places where his organization's work was being done. In 1950, he and his wife lived in a mud hut in a part of Ghana known as the Country of the Blind, because a disease that came from insect bites had blinded 20% of the population. He set his team to work on developing a preventative treatment for the disease, commonly known as river blindness. Using the drug Mexixan, the organization inoculated children in the 7 African countries stricken with the disease and all but eradicated it. By the early 1960s, river blindness was overwhelmingly under control. It is no exaggeration to say that generations of African children can thank the efforts of John Wilson for their sight. Under Wilson's direction, the organization conducted 3 million cataract operations and treated 12 million others at risk of becoming blind. They all administered more than 100 million doses of vitamin A to prevent childhood blindness and distributed Braille study packets to afflicted people throughout Africa and Asia. When Wilson retired, he and his wife devoted their considerable energies to Impact, a program through the World Health Organization that works on prevention of all types of disabling diseases. He was knighted in 1975. He received the Helen Keller International Award, and it goes on to give all of his accomplishments, and others have compared his accomplishments with those of Mother Teresa. Many people faced with the circumstances Sir John Wilson encountered would have bemoaned their existence. Perhaps they would have considered themselves cursed by ill fortune and frustrated in their attempts to do anything significant with their lives. Wilson, however, insisted that blindness was a confounding nuisance, not a crippling affliction. And he modeled that attitude in the most inspiring possible way. And it ends with, he lost his sight and found a vision. Think about that. He lost his sight and found a vision. He proved dramatically that it's not what happens to us that determines our lives. It's what we make of what happens to us, right? This book I love because there's stories like this all the way through. And the really cool thing about these stories, it talks about how important it is for all of us to find our purpose, to find our element, to find what will encourage us to get out of bed every day. And not only that, but it also encourages us to find our tribe. In fact, somewhere in here it talks about finding, there's a whole chapter on finding your tribe. And I was thinking about this weekend. I did a half Ironman triathlon in Illinois, and it was really a cool triathlon because the military had set this up in this man-made lake, Army Corps of Engineers lake, and they took you out in this military vessel and they dragged you out 1.2 miles into the lake, and then you dived off the raft and you swam back to shore to start the triathlon. So it's 1.2 miles swim, followed by 56 miles of biking, followed by 13.1 miles of running, right? So it's a half Ironman distance triathlon. And so when I was sat on the raft, and I sat on the back of the raft dangling my feet in the water while we were going out, I didn't know anybody. I actually went there without any family members. I just drove myself down there, and in 4 weeks' time, some of you know I'm doing the Ironman, right, in Hawaii, the World Championships. And so I was just quietly going to just do it as a training exercise. But talking about finding your tribe, as I'm dangling my feet, I'm feeling a bit sorry for myself these days because I broke my arm in a cycling accident about 8 weeks ago, and it hasn't gone straight again, you can see. So it's very, very painful, and I still have a fracture. and it's not healing, and now the muscle's not going. So I'm feeling pretty sorry for myself because I can't go swim really fast with all the fast swimmers, but I'm surrounded by these triathletes, and I don't know anybody. And then one girl notices that my arm is a little, and she says, "Is there something wrong with your arm?" And I said, "Well, actually, yeah, I kind of broke it." And so we have this full-blown conversation. And she tells me that about 8 years ago, and she's a little older, she might be in her early 50s, but she's just doing triathlons. But she said about almost 10 years ago, she came off her bike and landed with both of her elbows on the ground. And she fractured both of her elbows. I've just fractured one of mine. And she said it took her about 16 months for one of her arms to go back to normal, where she could have it straight. But I was thinking about that as I was revisiting the element. Here she is. She didn't quit. This is her tribe. She's on this vessel. She had a much worse accident than I did, and she still loves triathlon. And this is what brings her joy. And so then I was thinking, I need to stop feeling sorry for myself. So I was still able to swim to 1.2 miles, even with a broken arm. And I was united with this person who had a much cooler story than I do. And she told me about the triathlon she did and how long it took her to repair her body. And I started looking around. I got a whole new appreciation for all these people that were all huddled, shivering in the early morning, getting ready to jump into this freezing cold lake, even on a hot day. But it was really, really cool. And that's what our element is. It's not just about finding what we love, but it also involves finding the people that also love what they love, right? And then being a part of that community. I know we got a lot of athletes in the room. Well, you found your tribe. So Mason right there. So, I mean, he is one of the strongest guys on campus, and he is a prop forward on the rugby team. And so he found his tribe because he found like-minded people who just love that sport. And that's where he's found his space. That's where he's found what he loves. Carly's was a member of the women's rugby team here too. Same thing. So she grew up a whole life being active and playing sports, but rugby is sort of on the fringes sport. It's not a mainstream American sport, but it's a unique group of kids that play that sport. Sorry to call you guys kids, you're not kids. Grown adults. But you know what? They found their tribe, and they found something that they enjoy. I want all of you to find something you enjoy. So it has to be something that, again, you just get so excited about. So this book right here talks all about it, which obviously can't exist unless you have this positive energy, a vision for yourself, and get excited about life. I know I'm talking really fast. Is that okay?
Yes.
Brilliant. All right, which takes me to my last. I'm cheating here. We're only meant to talk about 2 books. And by the way, Lisa, I've got a present for you. I love books so much, so I wrote this a long time ago. It's a cross between Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, but it's a fantasy novel I wrote. And so the reason I pulled it out again, a student of mine from about 10 years ago, somehow they got a copy of it, and they called me and said, this is book number 1. You said you're writing a trilogy. Where's 2 and 3? I want to read them. And so I have to pull out, and so I've started writing number 2, just because that student says they want to find out what happens next. So I figured, there you go. You can have a book that I wrote. If it's bad, it's not my fault. Blame somebody else. So I wrote it under a pseudonym. That way people can't say it. Right, find out. There's a picture of me in the back, I think, on the back cover. All right, which I'm going to finish with this. You guys have seen this. It's everybody's favorite book to give at graduation, right? Oh, the places you'll go. I knew we were going to have some students here, so I want to keep this very student-friendly, but I love having the faculty in the room. Thank you so much for giving up an hour of your time to come and listen to Susan and I talk. Whew, I'm talking very fast. All right, so you ready? One more book with Coach Wright. Congratulations, today is your day. You're off to great places. You're off and away, because you're going to go find your element as soon as you get out of here, right? You have brains in your head, you have feet in your shoes, you can steer yourself any direction you choose, you're on your own and you know what you know, and you are the guy or girl who will decide where to go. You'll look up and down streets, look them over with care. About some you will say, I don't choose to go there. With your head full of brains and your shoes full of feet, you're too smart to go down any not-so-good street. And you may not find any you'll want to go down. In that case, of course, you'll head straight out of town. It's opener there, in the wide open air. Out there, things can happen and frequently do to people as brainy and footsy as you. And when things start to happen, don't worry, don't stew, just go right along. You'll start happening too. Oh, the places you'll go. You'll be on your way up, you'll be seeing great sights, you'll join the high flyers who soar to high heights. You won't lag behind because you'll have the speed, you'll pass the whole gang, and you'll soon take the lead. Wherever you fly, you'll be the best of the best. Wherever you go, you will topple the rest. Except when you don't. Because sometimes you won't. I'm sorry to say so, but sadly it's true that bang-ups and hang-ups can happen to you. You can get all hung up in a prickly perch and your gang will fly on, you'll be left in a lurch. You'll come down from the lurch with an unpleasant bump, and the chances are then that you'll be in a slump. And when you're in a slump, you're not in for much fun, and slumping yourself is not easily done. You will come to a place where the streets are not marked, some windows are lighted, but mostly they're dark, a place you could sprain both your elbow and chin. Do you dare to stay out? Do you dare to go in? How much can you lose? How much can you win? And if you go in, should you turn left or right of 3/4, or maybe not quite? Or go around back and sneak in from behind? Simple as not, I'm afraid you'll find for a mind maker upper to make up his mind. You can get so confused that you're starting to race down long wiggled roads at a breaknecking pace, and grind on for miles across weirdish wild space, headed, I fear, towards a most useless place. Waiting place. Don't want to be here, people. Okay, let's not go here. The waiting place is a place too many of us end up. For people just waiting for a train to go, or a bus to come, or a plane to go, or the mail to come, or the rain to go, or the phone to ring, or the snow to snow, or waiting around for a yes or no, or waiting for the hair to grow. Everyone is just waiting. Waiting for the fish to bite, or waiting for wind to fly a kite, or waiting around for Friday night, or waiting perhaps for their Uncle Jake, or a pot to boil, or a bed to break, or a string of pearls, or a pair of pants, or a wig with curls, or another chance. I was trying to make it right. Everyone is just waiting. No, that's not for you. Somehow you'll escape all that waiting and staying. You'll find the bright places where boom bands are playing. With banner flip-flapping, once more you'll ride high, ready for anything under the sky. Ready because you're that kind of a guy. Or girl. Over places you'll go, there is fun to be done, there are points to be scored, there are games to be won. And the magical things you can do with that ball will make you the winningest winner of all. Fame! You'll be famous as famous can be! With the whole wide world watching you win on TV. Except when they don't. Because sometimes they won't. I'm afraid that sometimes you'll play lonely games too. Games you can't win because you'll play against you. All alone. Whether you like it or not, alone will be something you'll be quite a lot. And when you're alone, there's a very good chance you'll meet things that scare you right out of your pants. There are some down the road between hither and yon that can scare you so much you won't want to go on. But on you will go, though the weather be foul. On you will go, though your enemies prowl. On you will go, though the huck and crux growl. Onward up many a frightening creek, though your arms may get sore and your sneakers may leak. On and on you will hike, and I know you'll hike far and face up to your problems wherever they are. You'll get mixed up, of course, as you already know. You'll get mixed up with many strange birds as you go. So be sure when you step with care and great tact, and remember that life's a great balancing act. Just never forget to be dexterous and deft, and never mix up your right foot with your left. And will you succeed? Yes, you will indeed. 98.75% guaranteed. Kid, you'll move mountains. So, your name Bucksbaum or Bixby or Bray or Mordecai Alley, Van Allen O'Shea. You're off to great places. Today's your day. Your mountain is waiting, so get on your way. So, the moral of that story is, read my books. Okay, so, energy bus. Be positive. Have a vision. Know that you're driving your own bus and you can go anywhere you want to. The element. Find your element. Find your tribe. Find a place where you belong. Find a place where you can thrive. And stay away from the waiting place. If you have your element, you will never ever feel like you're stuck. I'm done.
Awesome! Awesome! So, Professor Wright, how did you find your element? You know, can you share a little bit of your career path, whether it's more mountain goatee or whether it's more linear? You know, how did you find your element?
I don't know. It's some of you noticed already maybe, but I didn't like school. I actually never graduated from high school. So I left high school when I was 15 years old and just couldn't really do the academic thing. I was really not I wasn't smart. I just didn't like going to school. So I only went so I could play sports. And so I competed for my national team growing up in track and field. And that was a big part of my life, sports. And then an opportunity came. A friend of mine was going to the University of Georgia on a track scholarship. And so he had to go to the American University in London to take an SAT test. And he jokingly said, "Oh, you should sign up for this too. Maybe you could go with me somewhere." And I said, "But I didn't graduate high school." He said, "Don't worry, it's America." And so I went and took the SAT test with him, and I was like a couple of points away from a perfect score. So I had this great day where I must have guessed really good. And so he went out to the University of Georgia, and I went with him just to drop him off and have a little vacation. And while we were there, as a track coach from Clemson, and he was Irish, an Irish track coach. And he heard I was coming over. He said, "Oh, Paul, you need to come visit Clemson." So I went out to visit because it's just down the road from the University of Georgia in Athens. And I was 17 at the time. And I walked in on campus, and they gave me the tour. And, and it was in January 2nd or 3rd. The semester was starting January 7th. And so I was just on vacation with my friend Justin. And so anyway, they took me to admissions and said, this is what you would need in order to apply. And they said, have you taken ACT or SAT? I think ACT didn't exist. I think it was just SAT. I said, well, I've got this SAT thing. And I showed him a certificate. And the track coach had just lost some 800-meter runs. And I was an 800-meter runner. And he said, well, can you start? I said, yeah, when? He said, well, the semester starts in a week, but we might be able to get all this together. So this is the year before Clearinghouse started, but somehow they admitted me to Clemson University. Don't tell anybody because I'll probably lose my degrees. They admitted me to Clemson without a high school diploma. Don't know how that happened, just on an SAT score. So I started my career, as an athlete, and the only reason I went to school was so I could keep my athletic eligibility. But I got my undergraduate degree and my master's degree from Clemson, because I did a master's degree because I still had eligibility. So I said, I'll do more school. So they gave me a master's degree. That was great. And then I was on my way back to England, and because green card ran out, and then a call came, would I like to take a instructor teaching position at the University of Utah? And my friends were going out to train for the Olympic Games. So I went out to be a part of that training group and somehow ended up with a doctorate. So I don't even know how it all happened. It is really bizarre. And so, but I always wanted to be closely affiliated with sports. So from a very young age, my element was anything that had anything to do with sports. And so as I got older and started to get older and my body was still falling apart, I wanted to stay involved in sports because I loved working with athletes to try and help them realize their true potential. And so I just kept finding myself in coaching situations. And originally I came to Lindenwood to teach sports psychology, but as the track and field and cross-country coach. So I was recruited to do both, so teach and coach. So for 4 years before I went to China, I was here as the head track and cross-country coach. And so I guess my element has always been just be around sports, but help people realize their true potential. So in a nutshell, that was sort of my journey. So I'm trying. I'll answer shorter.
Does anyone else have any questions? Any other questions? Alrighty. Well, thank you all for coming. Here, I'll just step back here, but thank you all for coming, for attendance, or just because you really appreciate your professors. And feel free to join us in November. We'll have Professor Molly Hudgens, and we'll also have Dr. Erin Mann. So yeah, so thank you all for coming.
Okay.